Good evening and thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to this webinar. This is the third public webinar regarding the Aircraft Noise Competent Authority's consultation on noise at Dublin Airport. My name is Roisin White and I'm Communications Executive here at Fingal County Council, and I'll be your presenter for tonight's webinar. I'm joined here by the ANCA team and their consultants, and we're looking forward to hearing your opinions and also sharing some information with you this evening. Tonight we'll present the draft regulatory decision of the Aircraft Noise Competent Authority. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be provided on our website, fingal.ie, after the session in the next couple of days. For those who are interested, the previous two sessions were also recorded, and those recordings are already available online. This public consultation began back in November of 2021 and will end on February 28th of this year, just a few weeks from now. Overall, that's a period of just over 14 weeks. A significant period was afforded in order to get as many people as possible to understand the consultation and be involved in it. And we're very interested in hearing your submissions. Submissions can be made by individuals or by groups, such as maybe residents associations or business interest groups or commercial associations, who might wish to bring their views together as a single entity and make a submission as one group. We welcome your views on every aspect of ANCA's proposal, and you can share them at consult.fingal.ie, where you'll find all of the documentation relating to this consultation, as well as the area where you can make your submissions. We'll begin in a moment with a short presentation from Ethna Felton, who's Director of ANCA, and she'll be joined by Joe Mann, our Senior Engineer, and we'll then move on to a question and answer session. This online event is very much your opportunity to speak to the team, and we look forward to hearing your questions. And you can also put questions to our noise and environmental consultants this evening who've joined us online and are ready to answer your queries. If you have a query throughout the session, please enter it in the Q&A box, which you should find to the right of your screen. We'll endeavour to get to as many questions as possible. We know from our previous webinars that we're likely to have a high volume of questions this evening, and we'll try to get to as many questioners and questions as possible. As we found many people ask similar questions on a given topic, we might need to paraphrase or amalgamate some questions in order to get to as many of them as possible. And if you don't hear your exact wording read aloud, please don't be alarmed. Be assured that a transcript of every question will be provided to the team and all of your questions will be read in full. In the unlikely event that we have any technical issues tonight, please bear with us as we try to get the webinar restarted. It hasn't happened yet, but technical faults are always possible. If we do have a dropout and need to reconnect, we will contact you at the email address that you used to register for this session, so that's your first port of call. Thank you very much for joining us again, as I said, and for taking time out of your evening to be involved. Before the consultation begins, let's get started with a short video.
With a new North runway, Dublin Airport is returning to growth after the COVID pandemic. This growth is good for the economy, but aircraft noise is a serious issue for local communities. As regulator, ANCA has carefully assessed the DAA's planning application. We've concluded that measures are needed to mitigate the effects of aircraft noise on local communities and the environment, especially at night. So we propose directing the planning authority to include certain conditions when deciding on the DAA's application. Condition 1, a noise quota scheme. This works like a noise budget. Each aircraft is allocated a number of points, a quota count, which it spends based on the level of noise it produces. Planes with a high quota count will not be able to take off or land between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Total quota of 16,260 points is proposed for Dublin Airport. Condition 2, restricted flight activity between midnight and 6 a.m., although both runways may be used immediately before and after this period. This should cut down the noise so that locals can sleep better. Condition 3, a new residential sound insulation grant scheme. For households exposed to the highest levels of aircraft noise, this will provide finance to insulate their bedrooms. These measures balance the needs of the community with Dublin Airport's sustainable development, and we need you to tell us what you think in our 14-week consultation process. Review our proposals at consult.fingal.ie and visit the ANCA website at fingal.ie/aircraft-noise-CA.
With that, I'm going to hand over to Ethna Felton, the Director of ANCA, to make her presentation.
That's great. Thanks very much. And good evening to everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar. So yes, we'd like to update you on our current public consultation on 5 draft documents and answer any questions that you might have. But before I jump into the detail of these, for those of you who are not familiar with ANCA, I want to just give you a short background. We are the independent regulator for aircraft noise at Dublin Airport, and we were established in 2019 by Fingal County Council on foot of new European and Irish legislation. We have a number of responsibilities related to Dublin Airport. We regulate the management of aircraft noise at the airport, and we also ensure that aircraft noise is assessed in accordance with EU and Irish legislation. Currently, there are no noise operating restrictions at Dublin Airport, but in the future, when they are in place, it will be ANCA's role to monitor them for compliance. A further part of our role is to review all proposals for development at Dublin Airport and to determine if there's any aspect of a planning application that would cause additional aircraft noise. As most of you know, Dublin Airport has submitted a planning application in December of 2020, and we've assessed the aircraft noise impacts of that application. As I mentioned, there is no limit on the number of flights or the hours of operation at Dublin Airport currently, but the existing planning conditions for the new runway will limit night flights when this runway is completed, and two of these conditions are what the DAA have applied to change. We've undertaken technical studies to reach a draft decision on aircraft noise management, which is now what is out to public consultation. So just to give an overview of the process, this slide shows the process of assessment that we undergo. After ANCA received the DAA's planning application from the Planning Authority, we carried out a thorough technical assessment on the aircraft noise aspects of it. We required external expertise because this is quite a specialist field, and we have our experts here, as Roisin mentioned, on this webinar this evening to answer any questions that are quite deep. Together, we've assessed the current and future noise environment at Dublin Airport. And also as part of this process, we've consulted with other relevant authorities, including the DAA, to ensure that our recommendations are practical. And at this stage of our consultation, we've received submissions, 22, I believe, to date. And of course, these are being assessed. So as a result of our detailed analysis, we've come up with a number of conditions, and these make up the draft decision. As part of this process, we screened for appropriate assessment and for strategic environmental assessment. These recommendations will reduce the impact of aircraft noise on surrounding communities, while also providing for Dublin Airport to continue as an essential service for all of us and as a major employer and driver of Ireland's national economy. So first of all, we're proposing a noise abatement objective for the airport. The DAA will achieve this noise abatement objective by adhering to the three new conditions that we've proposed in our draft regulatory decision. I'll explain each of these now. So the noise abatement objective is the first of its kind in Ireland. It's a long-term plan to ensure best management of aircraft noise at the airport and surrounding areas. It considers the common good of all impacted stakeholders now and into the future. It will also guide future decisions that are needed to manage the aircraft noise aspects of the operations at Dublin Airport. So the noise abatement objective will also serve to dramatically reduce the impact of aircraft noise in the longer term. In fact, this will steer the reduction of people, steer the reduction in the number of people who are highly sleep disturbed by 50% in 2040 compared to the 2019 levels. We applied the balanced approach to our assessment of the noise situation at the airport to ensure that the noise mitigation measures, including operating restrictions, would achieve the noise abatement objective. The balanced approach was used as the framework for our assessment. This is required by both European and Irish legislation. There are 4 elements to this approach, and each one of these must be fully applied and theoretically tested to see if the noise abatement objective can be achieved. So the use of operating restrictions is considered to be the solution of last resort. So in terms of the 3 conditions I've referred to, it's proposed to introduce a noise quota system or a noise budget for nighttime operations at Dublin Airport. Each aircraft is assigned a quota number using internationally recognised methods. We are recommending that Dublin Airport be given a noise quota budget of 16,260 each year. And to put this in context, it's somewhat similar to the amount of noise that was generated at night at the airport in 2019, before the pandemic. As part of the noise quota scheme, we're also recommending that aircraft with higher noise quota numbers will not be permitted to take off or land at the airport between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. So ANCA or aircraft are assigned a noise quota number, as I mentioned, and that ranges from 0 for very small aircraft, very quiet aircraft, up to 16 for the noisiest. And each time an aircraft takes off or lands, the airport's noise quota budget is used according to the noise quota number of that particular aircraft. This slide is a little bit technical, but it's to explain the purpose, it's really to explain how the noise quota count system works. So the nighttime operations are coloured in grey. The orange or brown horizontal bars indicate the QC level and time frame for the operation of that QC that the DAA's application contained. And then the green horizontal bars are what ANCA has proposed in our draft regulatory decision. So you can see that they cover the full nighttime period, the green bar. This is an important, there is an important difference between ANCA's and the DAA's QC calculation in that we consider it important to regulate for the full night period from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which means that we have to include a quota count element for the additional period of restriction. So that's why we have come up with the annual quota count of 16,260 instead of what they had applied for, which was 7,990. For the second condition, it's proposed to restrict flights on the north runway between midnight and 6 a.m. This is referred to as operating mode 7B in the existing planning permission. And this will reduce the impact of noise on all of the communities in the airport vicinity and provide certainty as to how nighttime operation will work on the runways. And the third condition is for a new residential sound insulation grant scheme. And this is proposed for residents who are most affected by nighttime noise from Dublin Airport and who have not previously availed of other similar grants. This map is of the eligible residents who will be entitled to grants up to €20,000 to insulate bedrooms against aircraft nighttime noise. And you can find this map on our consultation website and zoom in into a very high level of detail. So just in terms of the next stages, these are the proposals that are within our draft decision, and we're keen to encourage everyone to read into the details and make a submission or observation before the 28th of February. All submissions that are in are being considered currently, and all others will be considered before we make our final decision, which will then be directed to the planning authority to include on the DAA's application.
Thank you. Just as the questions are coming in, I'm just going to give a quick look at our consultation portal where all the information is contained that people can access and get the rationale behind our decision. There's a very substantial amount of documentation available, and we do encourage everyone to go into this portal. It's at consult.fingal.ie. This portal will have all the consultations, both past and present, for Fingal County Council. By clicking on the aircraft noise consultation, it will bring to a page where there will be information as to how to access all the information that is available as part of the consultation, how to make a submission. There will be an overview of the planning application, which is a very high-level overview to give the information that's particularly relevant to our assessment. For anybody that wants a very all the detail of the planning application, this is available on the website of the Planning Authority. ANCA have set a noise abatement objective for Dublin Airport, and this is the long-term noise management plan, and that's available by the links on the right-hand side as well, together with a supporting report that explains what it means. We have also carried out 2 environmental assessments of the draft proposals, both strategic environmental assessment and the appropriate assessment, and some information is available at this location together with the documents. Our draft regulatory decision and related report is also available at this location. There is a large number of appendices associated with the report, and they're available also. There is also an interactive map where people can look at the noise contours, both for 2019, which was the maximum noise year to date, and also the contours both with and without our draft decision. There is also the contours can be brought up here for the existing and the proposed noise insulation schemes, and it's possible to zoom right down to an individual house to see where does an individual house fit in relation to these eligibility contours. So by entering an address or an air code, it's possible to go right to a home or a business of interest. So we do strongly encourage people to go in and access all the information that's available there. We also have a virtual consultation room that's available. It can be accessed through this location or through the Yanka website, and all the information is there in a format that can be readily accessed. So by going into this location, you'll be able to make your own submission and also read the submissions of anybody else that chose to make one. So we do strongly recommend that people engage with this portal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe and Ethna, for those presentations and for all of that information. I'm sure you can all see that there's a wealth of information to take in, but we know that there are people waiting with questions. So to start us off, we have some questions that were actually submitted in advance by someone on the call. So I'm going to start with these, and I think they're probably best directed to James. So first is, are Anka aware that noise levels exceeding 45 decibels, especially at night, can be very harmful for people's health when they are sleeping?
Thanks for the question, we've seen, and whoever put that one forward. I'm James Troll from Noise Consultants. I'm part of Anka's technical consultant team. To answer that question, I think I'll start with going through the background to Noise Abatement Objective. We reviewed the relevant guidance around environmental noise exposure and aircraft noise exposure as published by the World Health Organization in two documents, the Environmental Noise Guidelines 2018 and the Night Noise Guidelines for Europe, which was published in 2009. Those documents tell us to start getting interested at levels of noise exposure from aircraft at 40 decibels L night, and then to get significantly interested in that at 55 decibel L night. Those two values are reflected in the way in which the Noise Abatement Objective has been structured in terms of computing the numbers of people who are affected in a harmful way from nighttime aircraft noise in terms of sleep disturbance, but also to recognise that there is a need for priorities at 55 decibels L night. That is where we start seeing some quite significant harmful effects, and as such we need to look at interventions, and it's those interventions that have been aligned with the insulation scheme proposals.
Thanks, James. There is a second part to that question, which is to mitigate noise levels above 45 decibels for airport communities. Why don't Anka make it mandatory for the DAA to provide insulation for all houses in that contour or zone?
So, as I mentioned before, the proposals link back to the policy which we set out in the NAO, and that is looking at the point of intervention. And the policy that we've established in the NAO is a priority at 55 decibels L night. And that's where we've determined an intervention is required with respect to sound insulation. I should add that the insulation scheme does deal with people who are affected by aircraft noise at 50 decibels L night, where there has been a very significant change, or there's forecast to be a very significant change due to the use of the North Runway.
Thanks, James, for that very comprehensive answer. I hope that the questioner is happy with those answers. And so we'll move on now to questions from the chat. And just a brief reminder before I read this next one out, to please pop your questions into the chat as you go. They're all very welcome, and we'll endeavour to get to as many of them as possible in the time this evening. So the next question is going to go to Joe, and the question is, there is a significant noise at the airport in Holywell already. Considering North Runway being even closer may make this even worse. Who decided, and based on what decibel levels on zone that they could avail of this scheme? Holywell will definitely need to be considered according to the questioner. Joe, would you like to take a response to that?
Yeah, certainly. The homes that are close to the airport will experience the highest levels of noise, and that's a matter of fact. But what we're trying to do here at Dublin Airport is to move the airport from an airport that measures activity to an airport that measures noise. And for the first time at Dublin Airport, we're proposing to set a hard limit on the amount of noise that can be emitted at Dublin Airport. And a second aspect of that is to progressively reduce that noise level, that noise exposure over time. So we don't believe that the existing conditions will do that. The noisiest planes are already being made unwelcome at airports around Europe, and they will find homes wherever they can be made welcome. So we're proposing that Dublin Airport won't be that location. So we're proposing to put a hard limit on the noise and to reduce it over time, and all homes will get the benefit of that, albeit that the homes closest to the airports will experience the highest levels of noise. And that's why, by way of intervention, that we're proposing home insulation scheme for the homes closest to the airport, because, like James said, they're the homes that are within the levels that are identified by the World Health Organization as the highest, the levels of noise associated with the highest health impacts. But what we want people to do is to look at our proposals and see what our proposals mean to you, and to make other suggestions if that's what you'd like to do, because we do recognise that there is more than one way to manage noise. And having carried out our assessments, these are our proposals, and what we want to do now is listen to what the community feedback is on those.
Thanks very much, Joe, for that. You used the phrase hard limits there, and I think that's one that we are referring to again here with the next question, which is, will the usage of the runways be operated strictly as per the original planning permission? Again, I'll come back to you, Joe, on that, and if you feel you need to share it with anyone else in the team, please do.
Yeah, we're proposing that the original mode of operation at the airport shall remain unchanged. When we carried out our assessment, we looked at approximately 12 possible modes of operation for ways of operating the runway. Upon completion of the runway, the original planning permission puts limits on the shorter crosswind runway, and the airport is not seeking to change that, and agrees that remains appropriate. So certainly the original mode of operation that was proposed in the original planning application, ANCA agrees that it remains the best mode of operation into the future. But we do recognise that a lot has changed since the original application was granted, and it comes up as a recurring theme. Why is this assessment happening now? Why is the application happening now? And the airport is legally entitled to make that application, and here at ANCA we make no judgment upon that. They're entitled to make it, and they have done that. And ANCA now have a legal obligation to carry out our assessment in accordance with legislation that has come into legal effect since that application was granted, and that includes the balanced approach that Ethna covered in the presentation. But in addition to the legislation changing, there's also a change to the communities around the airport since that application was granted. And what we did as part of our assessment is we looked at how can we minimise the noise impact on the greatest number of people. And what our assessment found was, by partially opening up the use of the north runway for a small part of the night at the start and at the end of the night, that more people can be protected from the highest levels of noise, and that's why we're making that proposal.
Thanks very much, Joe. So Ethna, I'm going to put this next question to you, and it is, why did you grant everything that the DAA have asked for?
Thanks, Roisin. I suppose, well, really we didn't grant everything that the DAA applied for. We were quite familiar because of pre-planning meetings of what to expect from them, but when we went through all the details with their forecasts and carried out the noise assessment, there were some aspects of their planning application that we didn't agree with. And in fact, I would say that our elements were more stringent. I think, for example, in the slide, I explained that the QC limit that they had proposed, though it looks like a smaller number, the 7990, that was for a shorter period during the night, which essentially meant they would be regulated for a shorter time during the night. We felt it was more appropriate that they be regulated for the full nighttime period, in other words, 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. So we changed that. And of course, we had to give them extra QC budget, if we can call it that, for those extra hours. I think another aspect of the application that we did not, actually it wasn't part of their application at all, and we've included it, where we prohibit the use of the higher QC aircraft landing and taking off, and that will become effective immediately from when the application is through. So that's effective immediately, and then come 2030, the QC level of the louder planes will be lowered again. So making the noise level of the planes allowed to land and take off in 2030 even lower than they had been. We made some changes to the insulation scheme. For example, people now those eligible and approved for within the areas for insulation will be able to pick their own contractor. They'll be able to modify the statement of need. And also the eligibility year was changed by us. The application, I think, originally considered 2019 as the noise level contour of eligibility, but we put it up to the max noise level year, which we consider to be 2025. And I suppose there was one other element that we changed, which was in the application they had sought to be able to borrow or transfer QC budget, let's say, from one year to the next, so that if they had QC spare or short, that they moved into another year's budget, and we have not allowed that. So we have put some fairly clear lines in to what we think will manage the noise situation at the airport more tightly and put it better into the transparency of it all.
So another question coming in the chat here, which is, what in-bedroom noise levels do you hope to achieve with this scheme? James, I'll put that one to you.
Sure, that's fine. So I think just firstly to kind of build on a little bit of what Ethna just said in terms of what was submitted to ANCA in the application. There was some proposals that were made by the applicant. They brought forward some proposals for court account, brought some proposals forward in terms of noise insulation scheme, and really where the work of the ANCA team has been is trying to actually turn those proposals into something that we feel is acceptable and that has required modification, and in certain situations actually making more stringent, as Ethna has mentioned. And in the case of sound insulation scheme, that's actually required us to put together quite a comprehensive schedule of what we require and what we expect from that scheme. As part of that, there is a target performance aspect to the sound insulation scheme, and that is to provide at least a 5 decibel improvement in the insulation in the bedrooms, and to try and target a compliance with the guidelines set out in British Standard 8233 2014, which is for internal ambient noise levels.
Thanks very much, James. So another question is coming here around nighttime and the definition of it. So, Joe, if the nighttime is considered to be 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., why is the noise quota only applied from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.? And Joe, would you mind taking that one?
Yeah, certainly. It's common that when airports, refer to nighttime, they may be talking about nighttime airport operations. Here in ANCA, we have been very clear that the nighttime is as defined in the environmental legislation, which is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that's what we've applied through all our assessments. The airport was proposing a partial sound limit for part of the night that didn't catch a lot of the activity that happens early in the end of the night and at the start of the night. It's one of the changes that ANCA made, that we're proposing to have the hard limit of QC applied across the entire night. So anywhere ANCA uses the term nighttime, we're talking about the legal definition of nighttime in the environmental legislation, which is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And we've been very clear about that, regardless of how the term might be loosely used elsewhere.
Thanks, Joe. That's a very helpful clarification, and I hope that the questioner feels their query has been answered there. So the next question that's come in is, what has changed since the granting of the planning permission for the runway in 2007 as now? The houses certainly haven't moved, says the commenter. Joe, would you like to respond to that comment?
Yeah, certainly, and a lot has changed. The first thing I touched upon, I suppose, earlier is the legislation has changed. So since the grant of planning permission, The legislation now prescribes a standard method of noise assessment and standardised methods for introducing controls at airport noise. This started at international level at the level of the United Nations, and that method of assessment has now been enshrined directly into Irish law through European legislation and also given further effect through Irish legislation. So that legislation is very health focused, and what it requires is that all noise assessments for all environmental noise, whether it be rail, road, aircraft, it should be focused on removing as many people as possible from the highest and the most harmful levels of noise. So that's certainly what's changed in terms of how we carry out our assessment of what the legislation requires us to do. The communities around the airport have certainly changed. There is a lot of communities in place now that weren't in place when the original assessments were carried out, and all of those communities are entitled to the same level of protection that the communities were entitled to at the time that the application is granted. So by us proposing limits on the noise and the reductions of noise over time, and the use of the North Runway, what that seeks to do is to minimise and reduce the overall numbers of people exposed to the highest levels of noise, and that's what we seek to do. So we treat all communities as equal, regardless of where they live, whether they lived in a community that was in place when the application was granted, or whether you're in one of the newer communities. What we're seeking to do with this is to measure noise, manage noise, and reduce it over time, and to make sure that we avail of every opportunity to take as many people as possible out of the highest noise exposure areas, and that's very much in step with the recommendations of the World Health Organization and the legislation that enshrines those methodologies. We do recognise that the recommendations of the WHO can't be achieved overnight, that the technology isn't there, but we do believe that unless we start this airport on a path, that there will be no incentives to move towards that. And we don't believe that the previous conditions will drive reductions in noise exposure over time.
Thanks very much, Joe, for that answer. The next question I'm going to put to Ethna, and that question is regarding the enforcement of the decision. So the querier has asked, who will enforce the draft regulatory decision made by the Aircraft Noise Competence Authority, and what happens if the DAA don't comply with it?
So through our draft decision, we have set very real and measurable targets for the reduction of aircraft noise exposure around Dublin Airport. And we believe that the targets will challenge the airport to put in place the necessary measures to achieve the targets. So ANCA will monitor the implementation of the measures in our regulatory decision, and will also monitor the progress against the targets we have set. So our draft regulatory decision provides for measures that are required to manage noise around the airport. And the planning authority, strictly speaking, is the enforcement body, but we will be measuring them, in this, but working with the planning authority in the same way that all enforcement all planning conditions are monitored and enforced.
Have you done any field measurements for the houses that are placed in the flight path between the old and new runways yet? So the questioner is asking about areas around the edge of the cul-de-sac on Killaree Lane, for example.
Legislation requires us to use average noise, so noise that's averaged over a full year, and the reason for that is it allows different modes of operation to be compared to each other. It also allows 1 year to be compared to another, so it's possible to see the evolution of noise. So the forecasts will be provided based on the fleet that will currently exist and the fleet that's likely to exist into the future. When and a lot of the eligibility contours would be based on this forecasted noise. Then when the situation happens that we're moving from forecasted to an examination of the noise that did happen, the models are they're carried out with the fleet that was in place at that time, and those models are validated with noise measuring terminals that are out in the community, and anchored through a separate regulatory authority that we have. We're working very closely with the airport to greatly expand the number of noise measuring terminals out in the community to make sure that when the time comes to validate the forecasts that were relied upon, that there will be a very high degree of accuracy with them. So all the individual noise events are captured in the averaged contours, and that's the way our forecasts happen. So certainly the individual noise level, we understand that noise is not experienced in an averaged way, that the individual aircraft have a particular impact on people, but the legislation does require us to carry out all our assessment using a standardized averaged noise method, but to recognize the impact that individual aircraft movements have on people, we're proposing that the noisiest aircraft would be prohibited from operating from Dublin Airport immediately at night time and progressively reduced over time. The very noisiest aircraft that are currently in use around the world are already banned from Europe. But there are still a lot of aircraft that it's permissible to use European aircraft. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve and make sure that the noisiest aircraft that are currently in use in Europe can't access Dublin Airport. And that's to recognise the impact of individual aircraft on the community. So what we are hoping that that information will be available. The individual noise measurements will be available to the public in the near future, but that is a separate body of work that we are doing, and we're working closely with the airport on it.
Thanks, Joe, for that. Before we go to the next question, I think Ethna wants to come back in to give a little bit more detail around what would happen if the DA were to potentially breach the quotas that have been applied.
Yeah, thanks, Roisin. I knew there was another part to the question, and yes, if the noise quota limit has been reached, then there will be no more night flights permitted until the end of that noise quota period. So the noise quota period will run from April to April. And I suppose that's important to realise, because if it was January to December, it could be an issue at Christmas time when there'd be a lot of Christmas travel, but it runs from April to April, and if it happens that the noise quota is spent or used up, then no more night flights will be permitted.
Thanks, Ethna, for that clarification. So we've had a follow-up question here on the 45 decibel level question, which was asked earlier. The questioner saying they'd like more detail about in-bedroom noise levels, saying that the recommended in-bedroom noise levels from the WHO guidelines are 45 decibels. Our recent measurements in our home with fresh air omitted are measuring at 55 to 59 decibels. Can I go to Joe on that?
Yeah, this is something that has cropped up. And we've carried out a lot of consultations, with individual people and with groups since we were established in 2019. And this is a common theme that came to us, that in terms of the existing insulation schemes, it was a one size fitted all, and one size doesn't fit all. And that is the reality. And that was the feedback we got from the community, in that every house is different, both in terms of construction and age. And we do believe that it's not possible to have a solution. So when we prepared this draft regulation, that was one of the things that we sought to address. So instead of a statement of need, this insulation scheme, the bedroom insulation scheme, still provides for a statement of need where an expert will go and make a recommendation. But what we have proposed is that people who know their home best may want different measures for their home. So, for instance, they may want forced ventilation, and that's something that wouldn't have been available through a standardised scheme. So through this draft regulation, we're proposing that people will be able to move away from the standard statement of need to something that will better suit their home and better suit their own needs. And then we provided the additional flexibility, like Ethna mentioned earlier, that people may want to bring in their own contractor that will, somebody that they're happy and comfortable with. So we do recognise that every house is different, every home is different, and everyone's requirement is different. So we're proposing further regulation over and above what the airport proposed in this area. But we're certainly open through this consultation. This is very much a period of listening as to what is likely to work for every person out there, and we do want that feedback. So if anybody wants to make suggestions for how bedroom insulation would work best for them. We're very much open to receiving that type of feedback now.
Thanks very much, Joe. And there's a further kind of clarification question here around the decibel noise level that applies for bedrooms in the insulation scheme. The person who's asking the question is in the Holywell area and is very concerned that noise levels may at the current level might only be applicable to properties particularly close to the runways and the airport itself. I'm actually going to put that question to James first, and James, if you want to bring anybody else in, please do.
So in terms of noise levels inside bedrooms, what the guidance says, there's a 45 decibel maximum noise level criterion that originates from 1999 WHO Community Noise Guidelines. That has been used principally in terms of building standards around the design of new buildings, rather than refurbishing or going back to retrofit them with insulation. In fact, the latest British standards don't refer to that 45 decibel max criteria anymore. I think the other important note is that when it comes to assessing sleep disturbance, the process that we have to follow and the way in which the regulatory framework is set up at European level, which we're obliged to adhere to, given it's part of the process, requires us to use the L-night metric, which is the annual average long-term nighttime noise exposure metric, as the measure of sleep disturbance. And that is because that is where the evidence base for sleep disturbance is at its strongest. That is taken directly from the WHO guidelines and adopts the WHO response functions. When we look at other metrics such as LA max and the number of events, those guidelines do say that the relationship between population exposure and health is tentative at best.
Thanks, James. And just a reminder for those who maybe haven't had an opportunity to engage yet with the noise contours online, that those various layers are available on the map to view if you're interested in the different measurements and readings at different times of the day and night. Another question here now around curfews. Somebody has asked, did we consider applying a curfew between 11 p.m. and 7 p.m. like other European countries? And if not, why not? James, I might put that one to you again.
It was considered in the draft regulatory decision report. We cycled through all the various management measures that could be used or adopted, and a curfew was ruled out, and the reasons for that are given in the report.
Thanks, James, for that answer. So our next question is I'm going to put to Ethna, and that question is, can ANCA ensure that the DAA actually install the noise insulation agreed and any contract of noise insulation work signed and agreed with the residents? The person is concerned that this might be an issue, and I'm going to put that to Angela. Pardon me, sorry, we're just agreeing as a team who's best to give you a comprehensive answer here. So Angela is our planning expert, and I'm going to pass you over to her now.
Thank you, Roisin. As Ethna said earlier, the proposed conditions in the draft regulatory decision will be passed over to the planning authority to include them in any decision they make on the planning application. So it will be a matter for planning enforcement, but built into the insulation scheme, we have scope that homeowners can employ their own contractor if they're not happy with the contractors appointed. So there is elements of flexibility there for the homeowners. Thanks, Roisin.
Thank you, Angela. So the next question, somebody has asked, what has happened to the voluntary buyout scheme? Joe, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, the property purchase scheme remains enshrined in a planning condition associated with the original grant permission for the airport, and ANCA considers that it is appropriate that that would remain in place and continue to be assessed over time. So if noise levels change over time from those forecast at the time that that scheme was conditioned, it would be appropriate that additional properties would become available. So ANCA is certainly of the opinion that that scheme should continue, and indeed it does. It hasn't been that condition is not disturbed in any way by this particular application. But if anybody wants to make any submissions associated with that issue, they're more than welcome to do it, and we'd be happy to have them.
Thanks very much, Joe, for that. So the next question has come in as somebody's asked, what are Anchor proposing with regards to fresh air? I'm going to put this question to Toby.
Thanks, Roisin. Yeah, so this is the first question I've answered tonight. So just to introduce myself, I'm Toby Gibbs. I work for Logic and Consultants, which is part of the Noise Consultants Consortium, and I'm dealing with a colleague, Helen Davies, who's also on this call, with more general environmental assessment issues. I think with regards to this, it's important to recognise that Anchor's proposals here are not related to growth at the airport. Fundamentally, this is about managing noise, and specifically managing noise at night. And therefore, with regard fresh air specifically, it's not particularly relevant, because it's not, as I say, about increased numbers of aircraft. It's actually just about the times of the day that they fly within.
Thanks, Toby, for that clarification. That's really helpful. So the next question that has come in here is relating to the maps, and somebody's asked, is 7B option, is that the final map? I'm going to put that question to Angela. Sorry, I'm going to put that question to Joe, pardon me.
Sorry. Yeah, option 7B is it's the mode of operation that was prescribed by the original grant of permission for the North Runway. And what that means is when the wind is blowing from the west, which is 70% of the time, it's the prevailing wind at Dublin Airport, both runways can be used. Aircraft have to take off and land into the wind. So when the wind is blowing from the west, both runways can be used as determined by air traffic control. For arriving aircraft into the west, the south runway is the preferred runway, and that's what will be happening the majority of the time. For the shorter duration of time, when the wind is coming from the east, both runways can be used for landings, and the south runway is the preferred runway for takeoffs, and that's what will happen again for the majority of the time. So that reference 7B, it's somewhat of a carryover from the original grant of permission, but that's the mode of operation that for the daytime, and for the first hour and the last hour of the night, that mode of operation remains the best in terms of removing the maximum amount of people from the highest levels of noise. So that mode of operation won't apply for the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. It'll be south runway only. When there is a significantly reduced amount of activity at the airport. But we found there is activity at the start and the end of the night, and by utilising mode of operation 7B, it protects the maximum amount of people.
Thanks, Joe, for that helpful answer. So the next question has come in again around the balanced approach and around the planning permission. So if the planning permission is being modified in the interest of the balanced approach, is it only fair to allow residents in this situation to propose amendments to the planning permission also? Ethna, would you like to respond to that comment?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I'm delighted that that question was asked, because it's really on the point of our engagement, not just tonight, but in fact for the 14 weeks. Actually, it's more than 14 weeks. It's since the middle of November until the end of February. And we would really like to hear your thoughts and amendments and suggestions. So certainly, I and the team are here to encourage you and invite you to make your submissions and observations and whatever proposals that you feel might work well in this situation. So yes, certainly we want all opinions and suggestions included. And as I say, we're open until the 28th of February, and we're certainly available to answer questions in the interim between now and then if you feel that there's some aspect that we could help support with your public consultation, with your consultation aspect.
Thanks, Ethna. So next question around climate change, which is an interesting topic and a topical one, I suppose. With climate change being such an issue, why is ANCA facilitating the growth of Dublin Airport? I'll put that to Ethna.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the wording of the question that's really important there, that strictly speaking, ANCA's role is not about managing growth or permitting it or anything related to a planning application of the capacity of the airport. Our function is purely about managing aircraft noise in a sustainable way if growth occurs. It's the planning authority's role, just to be really clear on that, to allow or not increase capacity through the airport. It is our role to ensure that the noise resulting from that, from aircraft, is managed appropriately.
Thanks, Ethna. So the next question I'll put to James, and that is, what intervals were the noise quotas measured at?
So the noise quota, there's a couple of different ways to answer that, to be fair. Noise quota in terms of aircraft types range essentially double value. So if we start going down in noise output, we can start with 16, then 8, then 4, then 2, then 1, then 0.5, 0.25, 0.125, and so on and so forth, down to the point where they're effectively described as exempt because they're not noisy enough. Every time that there is a doubling or halving of an aircraft quota unit, that reflects broadly a increase of around a factor of 2 in the noise output, or a halving in noise output respectively. When we look at the quota budget, that is measured, and the interval for that is being measured as over an entire calendar year. So we're looking at the amount of noise that can be produced by the airport over that 8-hour night period from 11 till 7 AM over the whole calendar year, and that 60,260 budget is that budget that applies for that calendar year and for that period.
Thanks, James. Another question now about the maps that came with the environmental impact assessment report. Angela, can I ask you, when the 7B option seems to have been the original plan, why were so many maps included along with that report?
Thanks, Roisin. We considered a number of different modes of operations to determine which one was the best mode of operation and to find the mode which affected the least number of people. So it was necessary for us to check all modes and not just the original proposed, but it still turned out to be the best option and affecting the least number of people with the amendments we've proposed.
Thanks, Angela. That's a really helpful response. Appreciate the clarification. So, Ethna, there's a question here regarding meeting with the ANCA team. Are you available to meet on a one-to-one basis with individuals?
Yes, I'm delighted, and in fact, I would encourage people who feel that we could be of assistance to certainly make an appointment, and we would be happy to meet here in the office to go through any details or any questions or concerns that people have that we can help to clarify. So yes, please feel free to contact the office and make an appointment, and we'd be delighted to meet and hopefully assist with clarifications.
Thanks very much, Ethna, for that. We are coming close to the end, so I'm going to try and get to the last couple of questions. We're almost an hour into our session now. Thank you all very much for your enthusiastic responses and for placing so many questions in the chat box. As I said, we're always happy to answer them, and if there are any that we don't get to in the time that we have left this evening, we will absolutely be reading them all and taking them into consideration. So there is a question here that I'm going to put to Joe, and somebody has asked about, as a follow-on to the proposal the question that was asked about residents proposing amendments to the planning permission. Is that pertaining to the buyout scheme in particular?
Well, the buyout scheme is enshrined in a grant of planning permission, and it doesn't change in any way as a result of the application that the airport has made. So all the entitlements that were there remain in force. But if anybody wants, we have carried out a full noise assessment, and if anybody wants to make suggestions as to how the outcomes can be better suited to their circumstances, we're more than happy. We will have regard to every submission that's made, regardless of whether it was something that was in the original application or whether it was in our draft decision in terms of managing noise.
Thanks, Joe. I think we've time to squeeze one more question in, which is why not stick with the 65 flights per night cap as was originally enshrined to Dublin Airport? And Ethna, would you like to come in and comment on that?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Roisin. Actually, the 65 cap a night, I suppose to be honest, it's a measure of air traffic numbers. And that really isn't very helpful in in reducing noise, because I suppose it's quite a blunt instrument if you think that, you know, 65 flights per night versus a driven down noise number. If we compare them, I suppose if you think of 65 flights a night, and you know, we're one of the airports now that are hoping to push down the noisy planes QC number and prohibit them from landing and taking off at Dublin Airport. With a flight cap in place, that does not do that. That would essentially attract the noisier planes that the other airports around Europe may in fact prohibit. So it's too crude of an instrument to try and reduce noise at the airport to simply put a cap on the number of flights. I just want to take the final minute to thank people for all of you joining and your participation this evening. This engagement is extremely important for all of us, for yourselves to hopefully now more clearly understand the process of noise management at Dublin Airport and its environs, and also to, you know, understand how to make a submission if you're not aware of that already, and really certainly to, I hope I've conveyed the message that we're very willing to meet with people and engage in whatever way would be of assistance to you. So I would really encourage people to go onto the website that's hopefully showing on your screen and make your submissions. And as I say, contact us if we can help you. There is a couple of weeks remaining, so we would encourage you to please use that opportunity. And as I say, also all submissions that are put in to us will be considered. So thank you again for your time. For giving us your time this evening to learn more about this very important process.
Thanks, Ethna, for that. So just as we wrap up, we've come to 7:30 or just after now. I'd like to thank everybody who has attended this evening for giving of their time and their opinions and questions so generously. We are very pleased to be able to discuss this with you in this format. Obviously, circumstances up to now have not allowed for a public meeting. So as Ethna said, if you'd like to meet publicly or meet on an individual basis, please do avail of that offer. Thank you very much to the team for their input tonight, everybody from the Aircraft Noise Competent Authority, our consultants, and to Mark who produced this event. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. As we mentioned, the event has been recorded and the recording will be placed on the website in the coming days. Those of you who have attended this evening will receive a link to that recording by email at the email address that you used to register. And again, the recordings of our February and November webinars are also available online, and those links will be included too. If you do intend to make a submission, please make sure to get your submissions in if you can before the 28th of February when the consultation closes. We don't have any further information than that which you give us, so the more we receive, the happier we'll be to be able to include those opinions and those views. So if you would like to make a submission, please go to consult.fingal.ie to do so. And as I said, that closes on February 28th. Thanks again to everybody, and that concludes our event this evening.